Okay. All right, Kedusha Kesef. Let's start with what we have here in the Mishnah. And let's see something Tosafot. Let's start with the basics, okay? So Isha will go back. We keep coming back to the same place in the Gemara, okay? Just shows you how much there is in the first few lines of Masechet Kiddushin, okay? Haisha nikneit b'shalosh drachim v'konat atzma b'shtei drachim. Okay, nikneit b'kesef b'shtar u'b'bi'ah. Okay. Now let's take a look at the Gemara. Yeah. Haisha nikneit, and the Gemara immediately is concerned with lashon kinyan as opposed to lashon of kiddushin. And the Gemara says, "Umayshna hatam detania ish mekadesh." Right? Why here does it say Haisha nikneit? Umayshna hatam detania ish mekadesh. The Gemara answers, "Mishum dekabay lemitnei kesef." Okay, because we want to take kesef. Okay, the kesef minalan. And this is a question: minalan what? Okay. The simple reading, the way Rashi says, is how do we know that kesef is lashon kinyan? Kesef minalan gamar kicha kicha misdei Efron. K'tiv hacha ki kach ish isha, k'tiv hatam v'natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni. So it's Parshas Hashavua, right? Mm-hmm. Right. V'kichai kri kinyan d'chtiv hasadeh sher kana Avraham inami sadot bekesef yiknu. Okay. So the pshat in the Gemara is that why does the Mishnah use the language of Kinyan as opposed to Kiddushin? It uses the language of Kinyan for the benefit of Kesef. Right? Because Kesef is a Kinyan, and how do we know Kesef is a Kinyan? So Kicha Kicha Mistei Efron, that's Kicha, but how do I know Kicha is a Kinyan? So we make one connection that the Sadeh is Asher Kana Avraham. So Kesef is Kicha, Kicha is Kinyan, Kesef is Kinyan, and that's why the Mishnah uses the language of Kinyan here, as opposed to the language of Kiddushin. Okay? Ad kan, just simple pshat in the Gemara. Okay? Okay? Rachel, do I have to do a disclaimer again? I always have to. Okay, disclaimer. Okay, fine. Let's just say that, assume that it's done. Okay. Okay. Rachel is here to keep us honest. Okay, good. Okay, let's take a look here at the Tosafot. Dibra matlu mishum. Mishum de kabayla mitnei kesef. Is it on the page? No. Okay. It's a short Tos. I'm sorry. I didn't put the... Mishum de kabayla mitnei kesef. V'hacha lo shaykh lemifrach v'tani tarti atuchada. What do you mean? If kesef is the thing that's a kinyan, but shtar and bia are not kinyanim, so why, for the benefit of 1 out of 3, when 2 are not kinyanim, do you use the lashon of kinyan? He says, no, that's not a question. Why? The lashon kinyan shayach nami b'shtar u'bi'ah. So Tosfos begins by thinking, and this is important, that kesef is different than shtar and biyah, that only kesef is a kinyan, okay? Where shtar biyah, lashon kinyan, is not the proper way of describing it. Okay? So that he concludes shtar and biyah is also kinyan. Okay? V'lo hayat tamua lashon kinyan ela mishum delekaman tana lashon kiddushin v'acha tana lashon kinyan. Okay, that's what was bothering them. Nothing internally in the Mishnah was bothering them. The fact that kesef, shtar, and biyah are kinyanim, that the Gemara understood. And the Gemara says, why are we using the language of kinyan? Only because of the language of the Mishnah in the second parak, where the language is kiddushin. Okay? So the first opinion in Tosfot is, okay, let's take it slow. The Havamina, what spurs Tosfot's question is, kesef is different. Kesef is the only thing that's a kinyan. And then the conclusion is, no, they're all kinyanim. Okay? And then inami bishtar nami ashkhan lashon kinyan dichtiv akach et sefer hamakneh. Sefer hamiknah, I think. Okay, sefer hamiknah. So this holds, right? again, the same havamina, that kesef is different than shtar and biyah. And then the maskana is, forget about biyah, biyah is maybe not a kinyan. Or lashon kinyan does not apply to biyah, but it does apply to shtar, and then it's 2 against 1, and then you're still okay. So you don't need to have all 3 to be kinyanim in order to be able to use the language of kinyan. As long as 2 out of 3, so then it still justifies the use of kinyan. Okay? Now, why is this Tosfot important? Tosfot's assumption initially, and the truth is just based on on what the Gemara is concerned about, is that the lashon of kinyan is only applied explicitly to kesef. Right? So maybe kesef is different. Okay? In the conclusion, either they're all kinyanim, or at least kesef and shtar are kinyanim, and biyah is not a kinyan, right? Which is easy enough to understand. Although, just for the record, to be honest, right, in the Yerushalmi equates biyah by kinyan isha to chazaka in karka. Okay? So biyah could also be a kinyan, okay? Which is actually what the first opinion is in Tosfot. Okay, but what? Yeah, but the question is the language of kinyan, whether it applies to all of them or not. So the second day in Tosfot only applies to kesef and shtar, not to biyah. Okay.
No, I'm saying the sentence, the day of kesef and shtar biyah seems to be the pshat of the Mishnah assumes
okay.
The language of kinyan is applicable to biyah.
Right, but when the Gemara says why does it use the language of kinyan, it says only because of kesef.
No, I know, but then you were like, I want to be honest. The Yerushalmi also thinks this way, and I'm saying that.
Okay, fine.
The Mishnah thinks that.
Fine. Except the Gemara retreats from it, right? Okay. But the Havamin here is important, and based a pshat in the Gemara, that maybe kesef is different. The reason I'm stressing this is because we also saw last week, when we talked about Amirah in Kiddushin, and even though the Rishonim expand Amirah to biyah and maybe to shtar as well, even though it's written in the shtar, right? But the Mishnah and the Tosefta only talk about Amirah when it comes to kesef. Nowhere in Makorot of Chazal does it talk about Amirah in relationship to shtar or biyah. Okay, so that was something to notice there, and now I'm noticing it here. Okay, let's take a look at another Tosfot. The Tosfot previously. Tosfot, Dibra Matchil, the Kesef, afterwards, the Kesef min Nalan. Okay? Gamar Kicha Kicha Mistei Ephron. Okay? So it says, Ve'im Tomar, Umatzarich L'chol Zeh. What do you want to prove? You want to say the Kesef is Lashon Kinyan, right? So Matzarich L'chol Zeh. Lo yatzarich lomar ela kesef ikri kinyan dichtiv natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni uktiv hasadeh asher kana Avraham. What do you need the kicha mistei Ephron? Okay, so Tosfot answers yesh lomar the bahachi lo sagi. That would not have been sufficient to say that kesef is kinyan based on the language that we find by sadeh would not have been sufficient. Kesef ikri kinyan, kesef de isha lo ikri kinyan. Okay, we like that. Okay, in other words, just because I'm trying to be honest in all directions. Okay, you know the fact that the language of kinyan is applied to kesef when kesef is koneh in dine mamonot does not necessarily mean that kinyan, that kesef is a kinyan when talking about hilchot ishut. Okay? L'kach tzarich lavi raya de oto kesef de gamrinan ishamine ikri kinyan. Right, that's what you need the kicha mistei Ephron, so that all the pieces fit together. That you can say that even by kinyan ishut that kesef is a kinyan by virtue of the fact that kesef is a kinyan in karka. and it's called a kinyan, and there's an equation between karka and isha, so that the kesef in karka is a kinyan and kesef in isha is a kinyan. Okay? So that's what he needs. But again, the Tosfot does not assume naturally, right, that they are equal. Okay? Only after the Gzera Shava do we conclude that. All right? So what emerges from here in terms of as far as kesef is concerned is that kesef may be different than other drachim, right, and the other ways which are described in the Mishnah for creating a marriage. Okay? Kesef may be different. Why am I leading into that? Because if you take a look at the Gemara in Tubot here on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, right? The Gemara has a situation which we don't have to get into what this situation is, where the Gemara is interested in being mevatel the kiddushin. It's a case of afke'inhu, okay? For reasons of mamzerut, the Gemara is interested in being mevatel the kiddushin in this particular situation. So the Gemara says, "Umishum tznuot, umishum prutzot, sharin eishdish la'alma." She's still really married, so because of some sort of takana, you're going to make her muteret. In other words, the get is really puzzle, and you want to say the get is kasher. That's the situation there. So the Gemara answers, "In kol de mekadesh adaita de rabbanan mekadesh, va'afgeinu rabbanan kiddush minei." Okay, we're going to have a whole separate thing on afgeinu. Okay, but that's not our issue now. Okay. So there's afke'inu. Amar le Ravinu Ravashi, Teinach de Kaddish bekaspa. Kaddish bebiyah ma'ika l'meimar. Okay, I understand the din of afke'inu should apply if it's the kiddushin kesef. But what if we're talking about kiddushay biyah? So the Gemara answers, Shaviu rabbanan lebi'ilato bilatznut. We're not afraid of being mevatel kiddushin even in a case of biyah. And then the fact they had biyah, so retroactively, the biyah will be defined as bi'ilatznut. Okay? Now, why does the Gemara assume that there's no problem with kesef? Let's take a look at Rashi. This is a very important Rashi, and then we'll follow by the Rambam. Shavua rabban lebi'ilato lemafreya. Everybody with me? Yeah? This is Rashi on Gimel Amud Aleph. Shavua rabban lebi'ilato lemafreya al yidei get shehumi divreihem. Right? Midrabanan bilat, right? Bilatznut. V'yesh bahem koach lasot kein. Okay? Sharei hu tala bahem. Because it's sort of like he was told that it's like a tanai. He says al dat Moshe v'Yisrael, kidat Moshe v'Yisrael. So he's tole bahem. So if his dat is mutneit, if his dat is conditional, so it's conditional upon their accepting. I mean, again, I don't want to get into the whole thing right now about how afke'inu works. But if it assumes that it's only at the consent of the chachamim that he's mekadesh. So if they withdraw their consent, so there's no kiddushin at all. Okay, so they can do that. Okay, shamati kol rabotai mefarshim the kaddish bekaspa. The kiddushay de rabbanan ninhu. What's the distinction between kiddushay kesef and kiddushay biyah? Why in kiddushay kesef the Gemara says tainach the kaddish bekaspa? No problem that they should say afke'inu, but if they say afke'inu, kiddushay biyah, that's a problem. Right? So he says the assumption is that kiddushay kesef de rabbanan. V'iyah shalomar kein chada degzei reshavei kicha kicha mistei afron. V'chol al-meg zera shava kamo shekatuv meforashu l'chol davar v'od id rabbanan ninhu hech soklin al yado u'mevim chol la'azar al shigigatan. Right? If there's ne'uf afterwards, you should consider an eshet ish in this kiddushay kesef. V'sof sof ki kam mishaninan shavu rabban lebilato bilatznut al koch tzirich atalafaresh kamo shepirashti shakidushim ne'ekarim me'ikaran. V'lo mikanu lahaba. V'mefaresh lomar shuvu rabbanon l'chol mikadshay bebiyah b'ilat znut ta'ud gamurhu It's not going back. Uvala hatir eshet ish v'tkadeshet b'biya b'lo get min atam hazeh v'lo matzinu zot b'talmud. Okay, that has to do with afkeinu. It's not our issue. But what Rashi's Rabotav Shel Rashi held that Kiddushay Kesef was midrabana. And Rashi's questions are really very strong questions. Because Lo Matzanu, there was a chil that if Isha Zinta, that we want to know how the Kiddushin took place. Okay? And how could you have Kiddushin Drabanan? Again, there's no indication that's the case. But not only does Rashi, or Rabotav Shel Rashi hold this, it seems that the Rambam holds this. Okay? The Rambam is a little different, but let's see. So the Rambam in Choti Shut, Perek Aleph Halacha Bet, V'lekuchin elu mitzvat aseh shel Torah hein, uve'echad mishlosha dvarim ha'isha nikneit, b'kesef, o b'shtar, o b'bi'ah. B'bi'ah o b'shtar min ha'Torah, u'b'kesef midivrei sofrim. Okay, v'lekuchin elu henu kri'im kiddushin o erusim b'chol makom, v'isha shenikneit b'echad mishlosh dvarim elu henu kri'it mikudeshet o mu'ureset. Okay? And the Ravid, Bebi'ah u'v'shtar min ha'Torah v'kesef midvrei sofrim, Amar Avraham, zeh shibush u'perush mishubash hita'ato. He also learned the Gemara like Rabotav Shel Rashi. That's what the Ravid thinks. Okay? If you take the Rambam at face value, then he's saying it's Drabanan. But from the tshuva that I brought here, divrei sofrim in the Rambam does not always mean Drabanan. Divrei sofrim means it's not meforash b'Torah. Okay? But then you have to know, if that's the case, so then why? Who cares? Like what? Why is he telling me this? That this is midivrei sofrim. It's minat Torah. It's just not mefurash minat Torah. But there are cases where things which are not mefurashot b'Torah, they could be minat Torah, but they have a different status. In Hilchot Tumat Meit, the Rambam has this stat, or in Dinei Tumah V'Tar in general, he has the status of Tamei Din Torah. Right, so in order to be chayev or korban for bias mikdash, it has to be tamei. You have to be tamei din Torah. It's not enough that you're tamei midoraita from some sort of limud yud gimel midot. That has to be mifurash b'Torah. That's the Rambam. And if you look at the Rambam in Chosmas Meis, he has this ein tamei din Torah ella, and he has this phrase tamei din Torah, as opposed to tamei midivrei sofrim. So there's a nafkamina, whether the different levels of doraita. But here, I don't know. It's a little funny to say that it's divrei sofrim, and I mean it's minat Torah, but it's not learned that. It's not the forash. Maybe what the Rambam is getting at is that even if it's minat Torah, its nature is different. If you're willing to say, Goldberg was the Havmin of the Tosafot is talking about, that kesef is different than shtar and bi'ah, is that the idea of a kinyan, right? Kesef is the only thing that's a kinyan. Okay? Shtar and bi'ah create a new status, but the language of kinyan does not apply to them. Even though, again, I agree, the language of the Mishnah is not like that. But the way the Gemara says it, the language of the Mishnah is only because of kesef. So if we just take it at face value, the language of the Mishnah is for the benefit of kesef, so to speak. So maybe only kesef is a kinyan, and that idea, right, is midrabanan. Okay? Maybe. I say that be'eravon mugbal, limited liability. Okay? But that's, I still don't know of a halachic nafkamina between the two. And this is what bothers Rashi. When Rashi quotes Rabbi Tav, that's Rabbanan. Says, well, how could you say that? You can't have the obvious nafkamina. In this case, that there's no chiyuv skila in the Isser Eshet Ish here. Okay? Yeah?
Why is this important?
What?
I'm not sure why this is an important question.
I want to know what bothers me when I approach Kiddushin is the idea that there's a kinyan at work here. So if I can say that the idea of Kinyan is not minat Torah, right? So I feel much better about that. I think you should feel much better about that too. But I'm not sure. But I'm just raising that possibility to try.
Then it's also a Kinyan.
No, but if it be it could be bia as not a Kinyan. No, there's certainly some sort of action that has to take place in order to initiate the marriage. And that action has to be performed by the man, right? Ki kach lo ki tikach, right? So that we saw. But whether that action is a kinyan, an action of acquisition of any form, right, is problematic, we say, right? I think that's a self-evident that it's problematic. It doesn't reflect our reality. So if I can limit that and say in kesef, that's the case, kesef ikri kinyan, and the other things, not like Tosfot, right? Just stick close to the Gemara, that the Gemara's only talking, in fact, the Gemara was only talking about kesef, right? When it says kesef ikri kinyan, and that's why the Mishnah uses the language of kinyan in general. But it really, the best language would have been mikadesh, right? That's the language of Perek Bet, ha'ish mikadesh. And that would have been the language of a Isha Mitkadeshet, except since we're talking about kesef, they use the language of kinyan, because kesef is a kinyan. That's pshat in the Gemara. It might not be the best pshat in the Mishnah, but it is pshat in the Gemara, right?
How does it help us since all the kiddushin we do today is
Kesef, I understand, but I'm still I'm talking about this theoretically in terms of how I relate to it, okay? So
if we would relate to it this way, then we'd say that according to the Torah, there's kiddushin and there's not a kinyan, but then the rabbis introduced this idea of kinyan.
you don't use rabbis as a pejorative. I mean, I can hear that in your voice. But maybe I'm just, whatever.
No, I'm
Okay.
trying to understand.
Yeah, okay. Even though, again, to be fair, at the Rambam, when he talks about what was mitchadesh after Matan Torah, right, before in the time of Bnei Noah, before Matan Torah, so haya ish pogeh b'isha b'shuk ratzahu v'hi, right? So it's very romantic, right? They meet, they fall in love, and they live together, right? But after Matan Torah, the Rambam's language is that the Torah was matzrich of kinyan, right? And that's if I remember correctly, shikneu tatchila. Let's see. Kevan shenitna Torah nitzavu Yisrael she'im yitza ish lisa isha yikneu tatchila b'fnei edim v'achar כך tהיה לו לאישה שנאמר כי כך ish isha uva eleha. Right? That's halacha aleph. So he does talk about kinyan. Okay, so.
It was particularly disturbing that we never articulated that in the pre-Torah he says that they both consent, and in the post-Torah it's just his desire. Like
no.
Repsahi, I don't have it in front of
She'im
me.
yitza ish lisa isha yikneu tatchila b'fnei edim.
Read the pre-Torah.
Oh, but we already talked about dat. I don't know if you will hear
yeah.
that one. We talked about it could be even needed a higher level of dat than in general, because what's happening here is not a regular kinyan. It's a kinyan which involves a creation isur eshet ish, and you need a higher level of dat, and that's what the Gemara talks about. That you shouldn't think that you don't need dat of the isha, right? That we talked about that. Right?
I wasn't saying that it didn't have that. I was just saying that his language there is odd.
The language switches because he's the one who initiates the Maisa kinyan.
They created it as if it was a mutual consent, and then post-Torah it became like just when you compare the two experiences, the
He becomes
pre-Torah
active.
sounds much better than the post-Torah.
Right. Okay.
In the abstract,
Let's.
In the abstract, it does. I mean, if we were to rub it up against reality, the state of nature wasn't exactly kind to
women.
physically weaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
The pre-law state was violent, right? I mean, we can. I don't want to get lost in the text.
Okay. I want to define what the kesef is. And through trying to define what the kesef is, you see what I mean by that? I want to understand better how it works. Okay? Take a look on Daf Vav. I have it here. Vav and Bet. Okay? Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Abaye. Okay, Vav and Bet. Hamekadesh b'milveh eina mekudeshet. B'hanat milveh mikudeshet. So the case is, a man lends money to a woman. She now owes him money. And he says to her, with the money that you owe me, that money, I'm bikadesh you. Okay? Haret mikudeshet li, b'chov zeh sheyesh li alayich kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. Okay? Eina mekudeshet. Okay, she's not mekudeshet. B'hana'at.
He's giving her the money in this case?
What?
He's giving her the money? Or
No, he lent her the money. She owes him money. And with that money that she owes him, he wants to be mekadesh. So, eina mekudeshet.
Just the way if she handed him money, it wouldn't work.
No, we're not talking about that. He's giving her something.
But I don't understand how he's
It's
being.
not. You just said it's the money that she owes him.
She owes him money. Now, she won't owe him the money anymore. That money,
To annul
hey,
those things.
that money that you owe me, I'm mekadesh you with that money. So now you get that money and you don't have to pay me back. Okay? The woman owes the man money. That money, he is mekadesh her with. Okay? B'hanat milveh mekudeshet.
That's not the third case?
No. Okay? B'hana'at milveh mikudeshet. What's hana'at milveh? This really begins to, right? So the Gemara is going to explain that. Ba'asur lasot kem mipnei ha'aramat ribit. Because it's like ribit. Ha'aramat ribit is ribit midrabana. Okay? Hai hana'at milveh hechidami. Ilema da'azkifa da'amar la arba b'chamisha. If at the time of the loan, he says, I'm lending you 4, you're going to have to pay me back 5, and that 5th zuz that you owe me, which is ribit, I'm mekadesh you with that 5th zuz, right? Haribit ma'al yatahi, that's ribit midoraita. That's not ha'aramat ribit, right? If bishat halva'ah, you stipulate that the payback will be greater than the loan, that is ribit min haTorah, okay? Va'od hainu milveh, that's the same, that extra zuz is also milveh. Because just like the loan, the money of the loan, the moment I lend somebody money, that money disappears. In other words, it becomes pure liquid. And what's created instead of the money that I gave, the money that I gave generates an obligation. Now all there is an obligation to pay back the money. But that money doesn't exist anymore. Are you with me? Okay. So here too, there's just the chov. There's just the chov of the ribit. So that's milveh. So first of all, that would be ribit min haTorah. And second of all, it's not better than milveh. Okay. So, and here we get to here it gets lo tzricha da'arvich la zimna. We're talking about a case of when he extended the time of the payback. Okay? Okay, let's leave that for now, what that means. And concentrate on Mekadesh b'milveh eina mekudeshet. Okay. Let's see the Rambam. Okay. Actually, before we see the Rambam, let's just think about this for a second. Abai says Mekadesh b'milveh eina mekudeshet, and the case is the way I described. Okay. So there's no. Yeah. A man lends a woman $100. Okay? Now, the moment she receives the money, that money is not his anymore. That's called milveh lahotza'ah nitna. The money is not his. Okay? It's become fluid. So where did the money go? The money that he gave is now translated into an obligation. She now has to pay him back 100. It's not like a pikadon. Pikadon is if someone gives somebody to use. If I rent you my car, the car still belongs to me. While you're using it, it belongs to me. And you have to give me back the same car. Right? The car is not liquid assets that you can give me back a different car if you want. Right? But money is liquid. It's just the idea of money is pure value. It's pure value. There's no object. So the moment there's a loan takes place, this is standard above Mitzvah stuff, okay? The moment a loan takes place, if you say milveh lahotza'ah nitna, the money doesn't exist anymore in the sense that that $100 bill that I gave to somebody else as a loan stops being mine. They're kona that $100 bill, okay? And if they say, where's my money? It doesn't exist anymore. But what does exist is you have to pay me back the loan. But there's no specific money that I can say is mine. I have a lien. It's called a shibur aguf. I have a lien on your body. Eved lo v'leish malveh. Right? right? You become my slave, in a sense, that I have a lien on your body to pay me back. We're not talking about a pound of flesh, right, or without a drop of blood, right? But we're talking about you have a financial obligation to pay. Actually, what's his name? Rav Zevin, Olav Shalom, wrote an article about Shylock, about Shibudim, and he did a halachic analysis of the situation. It's very interesting. In the Or HaHalacha. It's very interesting. He talks about the whole thing. Anyway, obviously a little apologetic. One said that Al Pi Halacha such a thing could never happen, etc. But anyway,
before the loan, if he said, I will loan you this 100 zoos.
So I'm not talking about Arvach Lazimna yet. Hold on. Okay? What is Eina Mikudeshet? Eina Mikudeshet is, since the money doesn't exist, okay, he can't be Mekadesh with the money that doesn't exist. Okay. Hana'at milveh could be a different story. Maybe if he says, with the hana'ah that you get, the relief that you feel when I say you don't have to pay me back, and that sigh of relief is worth a shava pruta, that's a different story. Okay? But if he wants to mekadesh with the money itself, it's eina mekudesh. Okay? Everybody have the case straight? That's the case. Okay, now I want to understand, I want to analyze that case. Okay, but first I have to get the facts. Okay, so the facts we agree on. Okay? Now, there are two ways of looking at this. This is the Brisker analysis, right? There are two ways of understanding why is it the Mekadesh Milva Eina Mekudeshet. The first, which sort of emerges from everything I said until now, is that this is not a unique halacha in the laws of Kiddushin. It's a halacha in the definition of what is kesef. And whenever a kesef would work as a kinyan, halva'ah does not answer those requirements. In other words, kesef is kone karka. Right? Karka is nikne, the kesef, b'shtar, u'b'chazaka. Okay? So, if you owe me money, and I say, and you have a sadeh, you have a house, I say, I want to buy your house, and with the money that you owe me, I want to do a kinyan on your house. Okay? So, it's not a kinyan, because a halva'ah is not defined as kesef. It's across the board. That's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding is that there's something unique thing in the laws of Kiddushin that milveh doesn't work, whereas milveh could work elsewhere. Okay? The two ways of looking at it, and then that would require an explanation of why that is so. Okay? All right, so let's see. Let's start. Actually, let's start with the Tosfot. Before we do the Rambam, there's a Tosfot in, I did give that to you, on Bav Metzia, Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet. It's on the last page. Okay? The Gemara says, okay, I'll give you a little bit of background. You have patience to learn a little bit about Kinyanim. Okay? It says, Yesh damim shehem kechalipin. In general, the halacha is, okay, Kinyan chalipin is when there's an exchange of objects. Right? Machlif para b'chamor. Right? Or what it comes down to what you see, like giving a handkerchief and receiving something in return. It's an exchange of objects. It's sort of it's sort of an intellectualization of barter. Let's put it that way, okay? Or a conceptualization of barter. But it's an exchange, okay? You can't be kona b'chalipin with money. Money doesn't work in chalipin. It has to be a kli, okay? Let's accept that for now. Just like the Nal in the story of Ruth is a kli, right? It has to be a kli. It can't be ein matbeh nasa chalipin. But there are some times where money can be kona like chalipin, and that is in a case what's called chov machmat hamecher. Whereas if I sell something to you, now you owe me money. With the money that you owe me, I say that money that you owe me because I sold you something, I want to buy something that you have. That you can do. You with me? It doesn't really matter. Just so you should understand, yesh damim shehem kechalipin. Under certain circumstances, the exchange works. Okay? All right. So now, let's see what Tosfot says. Umakni lahu. How does this work? that the kesef can be koneh an object, even though the kesef doesn't exist. Right? It's just a loan, so the loan doesn't physically exist. Right? It says, "Umatnilu b'mechilat hadamim." You're not being koneh with the money itself. But you owe me money, that money I want to be koneh your field. No. What I'm koneh your field with is the fact that I'm mochel the chov to you. Would you pay me to be mochel the chov? That mechila, not the chov itself, but the mechila of the chov gives you hana'ah. And hana'ah is shavat kesef. Okay? It's like if you want to translate, you would say, would you pay someone, an agent, to convince the guy to forgive your loan? Right? How much would you pay an agent to convince the bank to forgive the loan, to negotiate with the bank for you, to reduce the loan from $1 million to $500,000? How much would you pay an agent? Right? You pay him $100,000, right? And then what? So that's worth. That means that mechila is worth money, not the loan itself. Okay? So Tosfot says, how does it work? How can damim be koneh if it's a loan? The answer is the loan itself is not koneh. Mechilat hadamim is koneh. Yeah. Af agav da'amar b'kiddushin amin kadesh milva eina mikudeshet ubemecher lo kana, and it doesn't work for buying and selling things either. Hainu ki kidsha o kana hachefetz b'ma'ot shechayav lo. That's if you want to buy the object or be mekadesh the woman with the money itself, and the money itself doesn't exist. Okay. Aval kidsha o kana behanaat michilat milve, but if he wants to mekadesh or acquire an object with the pleasure that he gives to the other person that they experience when he is mochel the chov, that's something he gave to them, right? That works. Mo'il kimo arvach la zimna va'adaber elayich la shilton. That's the case, according to Tosfot, of arvach la zimna, that it comes now time to pay the loan. He says, you know what? You don't have to pay me back now. Okay. So that relief that she feels that she doesn't have to pay back now, he's not mekadesh with the money. He's mekadesh with the feeling of relief that he gave her by making it that she doesn't have to pay back now. Okay? So Tosfos is the assumption that Tosfos is making. Everybody understand what Tosfos is saying? Okay? That when does the loan work? The loan never works. Doesn't work. Okay? So what does it mean that yesh damer chalipin? When we're talking about being mekadesh with the hana'ah of the mechila, as opposed to the loan, as opposed to the money of the loan itself. Okay? That's what Tosfos says. Now let's go a step deeper. What is Tosfos' basic assumption? The basic assumption that Tosfos is making is that there's no distinction in the halachot between kiddushin and mechira. Right? That means that since milve lahotzah nitna, when you give money as a loan, the moment the transfer of funds takes place, the borrower is koneh the money, and it becomes theirs, and an obligation is created in return. Okay? That is not, by definition, considered kesef. Right? Kesef hasadeh kach mimeni, that kesef is koneh, b'sadeh is kesef, cash. Right? Green guts. You remember your Harry Potter, right? The cash is in the safe, right? It's not in the computer. There's cash in the safe, right? So that it has to be cash. That's what money is. An obligation is not money. You know the joke? In God we trust, all others pay cash, right? So cash is money. An obligation is not money. It doesn't constitute the legal definition of money. It might be worth something. People buy and sell loans all the time, right? But that's not defined as money, and it does not fulfill the ritual requirements of kiddushin, because you need kesef, and it does not require the financial requirements of kinyanim. You need cash. You can't do a maaseh kinyan with a loan. You can pay off an obligation with a loan, right? But you'd have to, in order to buy the sadeh, you'd have to give something of value, if you're doing it with kesef, to the seller. It could even be a shavat pruta. And to the rest, that is, you owe me money from before, and now I'll take it from you, but now you don't owe me the money anymore. But that's just settling the financial arrangements. But the kinyan still has to take place through a maaseh kinyan, and if it's kesef that we're doing, you need a maaseh nitina of kesef. Agree with me? That's Tosfot.
But then we just say that the hana'ah is kesef?
What?
Then we say the hana'ah is kesef?
Why? Who said to talk about hana'ah? What Tosfot is saying here? Oh, so
Meaning the annulment of the loan is what he's mekudash on now.
if he says not
the
the
how do we call that kesef?
what?
How do we call
Because
that?
giving someone pleasure is also shaveh kesef. שמונה וחצי. So you're not being mekadesh with the kesef itself, but with the pleasure that you're giving them for being mochel on the kesef, right? Because as the Mishnah talks about adaber elach la shilton, rakod lefana, right? He can do all sorts of things that give her pleasure, and that is shaveh kesef. Okay, but not the loan itself. Okay, so that's Tosfot. Okay, let's take a look at the Rambam. The Rambam is. Let's see two Rambams here. Hamikadesh b'milveh. This is Rambam Perikein Chotishut Halacha Yud Gimel. Okay. Hamikadesh b'milveh. Afilu hayta b'shtar. Eina mekudeshet. Okay. Ketzad. Kegon shayalo etzla chov dinar. That means she owed him a dinar. V'amar la hareat mekudeshet li b'dinar sheyesh li biyadech. Eina mekudeshet. Why? Mipnei shamilvel hotzah nitna. I was very careful with the language of the Rambam. Ve'ein kan davar kayam lehenot bo me'ata shekvar hotzia oto dinar ve'avra hana'ato. Okay? So the Rambam says, that's okay. Because what we have here, there's no tangible money here. Ein davar, right? There's nothing here. Okay? What we have to do, methodologically, right? What do we have to do? So now let's see, what does the Rambam hold by Kinyanim? And how does he describe the situation there? So that's at look in Hilchot Mechira, okay, and that's in Perek Dalet. I'm sorry, Perek Zayin Halacha Dalet in Hilchot Mechira. Okay. It says Mi shayalo chov etzel chaveiro. Right. So now we're not talking about kiddushin anymore. We're talking about financial transactions. Okay. Mi shayalo chov etzel chaveiro. Va'amar lo mechor li chavit shel yayin b'chov sheyesh li etzlecha. Okay, let's keep it straight. It's a little complicated, right? Somebody owes me money, but they have merchandise that I want to purchase. Okay, so it's very simple. Instead of my going home, getting the money, writing him a check, giving him the money, I say, look, you owe me money. So with the money that you owe me, I want to buy the chavit yayin. Okay. V'ratzah hamocher harei zeh kemi Shenatan hadamim ata. That's as if he gave the money now. Okay? This is yesh damim shein kechalipin. You owe me money. I want to buy some merchandise, and I'm doing it. I want it, and it's like I gave you the money now, right? And in metaltalin, if you know your Bava Metzia, kesef is not kona in metaltalin. It's kona le'inyan mishapara. It creates. Midoraita kesef is kona by metaltalin. Midrabanan it's not. I don't get to why. Midrabanan it's not. But what it does do, it's called the kinyan le'inyan mishapara. You know what a mishapara is? It's the exact opposite of mishaberach. It is, right? A mishapara is you curse somebody, right? It's a mishapara me'anshei dor ha'mabul, me'anshei dor ha'flaga, right? Hu atid li para mimi she'einenu omed b'diburo. It's the exact opposite of Mishaberach. Okay? So, the person gets cursed in Beitin. So it's considered a pretty severe type of obligation. So kesef does that. Okay? So he says, Har'el kemisha natan damim ata. V'chol hachozer bo mikabel misha para. Even though it's b'milveh. So the netinat milveh, even though there's no kesef in the language, the definition of the Rambam, there's no kesef ata, no kesef here now, but nonetheless, for when we talk about kinyanim, financial kinyanim, the relinquishing of the loan is tantamount to giving money, and if you're talking about metaltalin, then it creates a chiyuv of a mishapara. Okay? Lefichach, im machar lo karka b'chovo, and karka is nikne b'kesef, ein echad mehem yachol lachzor bo, right? Then it's binding. V'af al pi she'ein ma'ot hamilveh mitzuyot b'shat hamecher. So in kinyanim, you do not require that the money should be tangibly present. It is sufficient to be kona an object or real estate with a loan.
Is there a difference? But the fact that it says Ein echad min yachol lachzor bo, is that different than saying Har'el Kinyan? Like, is there a reason that he doesn't say Har'el Kinyan?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay, so that means that the Rambam, as opposed to Tosfot, distinguishes between kinyanim in Dinei Mamonot and kinyan ishut in kesef, right? That the kesef, kinyan kesef beishut, is defined differently than kinyan kesef in Dinei Mamonot. Okay? This would, of course, fly in the face of Tosfot, and even what Tosfot said explicitly in Bava Metzia, and also what Tosfot implied of what you get out of the kicha mistei Efron. Right? The kicha mistei Efron, according to Tosfot, tells me that the kesef in stei Efron is the same kesef of kinyan isha. If it's the same kesef, then it has the same definitions of kesef. It means if halva'ah is not defined as kesef, then it's not defined as kesef in Dinei Mamonot, and it's not defined as kesef in Ishut. But the Rambam draws a distinction. In Dinei Mamonot, a loan is defined as kesef, and in Ishut, a loan is not defined as kesef. Okay? Let's look at the Ravid. Ravid said, Misha Elo Chov, Amar Avraham, Lo yadati ze lama. Okay? Sharei hu shvu ha'geonim kulam, mil v'lahotza nitna, ve'ina k'netinat ma'ot kla. A halva'ah is not like a loan, is not like cash. V'hachi amrina b'kiddushin, and the proof is kiddushin. V'shavim b'mecher, shezeh koneh, v'i mil v'lahotza nitna b'mecher b'mai kana. So the Gemara then backtracks and says that if it's mil v'lahotza nitna, which we hold, so then it doesn't work by mecher, and it doesn't work by Yishut, right? It's the same. So the Rambam got confused from some halacha in Hilchot Ribit, which is not our issue, and he says the Rambam misunderstood the context. The context there is not Kinyan. The context there is Isurei Ribit, not our issue. Okay, the Ravid here is along the same. It makes the same assumption as the Tosafot. Okay? That the definition of kesef, when it comes to kinyanim, is the same definition that you have by Ishut, and if we can prove one from the other. Whereas the Rambam distinguishes. Okay? This comes out in, let's take a look here, in the continuation of the Gemara as well. Okay? So the Gemara continues here. Amar Rava, man vara medbet. Right? You have it on the page. Amar Rava, Heilach maneh al manat shetachzireu li. Okay? Very romantic. He gives her the ring. Right? Her nigdeshet li b'taba'at zo Kedat Moshe Yisrael, al menat shetachzireu li. Right? You have to give me back the ring. Okay? So, Heilach maneh, al menat shetachzireu li, b'mecher lo kana. If I want to be koneh sadeh, and I want to be koneh sadeh b'matana al menat lachzir. Okay? So, it doesn't work. Okay? In other words, because if I give it back, so I don't have the money. If I don't give it back, then I never got the money because it was against the Tanai. So it's not considered Nitinat Kesef. Matana al Manat Lachzir is not a matana that, okay, in the meantime it's a matana. Right? It's not considered a matana as far as the ritualistic or financial requirements of quote-unquote Kesef. Okay? B'mecha lo kana, b'isha ina mikudeshet, b'pidyona ben ein beno padui, b'truma yatzei dei nitina v'asur lasot kein. Okay, there's a problem with truma, right? Okay, my kasavar rava, I kasavar matana matachzir shma matana, afilu kulunami. So then all of them, it should work. Vi kasavar lo shma matana, afilu trumanami lo. Okay, so then we have a problem. So we say, the conclusion is, El Amar Avashi, Bekulu Kani, Matalna Amanat Lachzir works every place, Levar Meisha, except in Kiddushin. If I want to buy karka, I can give a pruta to the owner of the field, or to the owner of the house, and say, this pruta is Matana Amanat Lachzir, you have to give it back to me. It's what happens, what you see all the time in a sudar, right? Except it's not explicit. What happens? I take out a sudar, the other person is moshech, and I take it back, right? So some people understand that as a matana matachazir. Not necessarily, but that's what you see, right? The person takes it and then he gives it back. So if you would do that to be koneh a sadeh, that you give something of value to the owner of the, but not chalipin as far as kesef is concerned, you give something of value to the owner of the field, he takes it and then he gives it back to you. So we did a kinyan. It's a matana al manat lachzir. So he says, b'kulu kani, levar mi isha, except for the case of kiddushay isha. Right? If the man gives a shavet pruta to a woman and says, Haret mekudeshet li, al menat b'tabat zo, al menat shetachzireu li, she eina mekudeshet. Okay? Lefi she'ein isha, now the reason is interesting. Lefi she'ein isha nikneit b'chalipin. Okay, we've got to take it slow here. Lefi she'ein isha nikneit b'chalipin. We're not going to be doing the sugya of chalipin, which is on Daf Gimel. But any shanik nek b'chalipin, the Gemara says it's because one of two possibilities, two girsaot. Either because chalipin can be done, needs to be done with the kli, and the kli can be worth less than a shava pruta, as long as it's a kli. Okay, you can have a, right? This is a kli, right? But it's a machat, right? You can do chalipin with a kli, even if it's not shava pruta. Kesef has to be a shava pruta. So the Gemara says, two girsaot, that isha ina nikneit b'chalipin, because b'chalipin ita b'pachot mishava pruta, u'b'pachot mishava pruta isha lo mekanya, or pachot mishava pruta isha lo mekanya nafsha. Two girsaot. According to the second girsa of isha lo mekanya nafsha, it's a bizayon. So since a bizayon, the woman doesn't agree to be mitkadeshet. It's like a umdana. So we said a woman doesn't agree to mitkadeshet through a kinyan, which there's a possibility that should be pachot mishav pruta. Okay? Either that, or just technically speaking, pachot mishav pruta ishalom makanya, chalipin is just not one of the ways that you can be mekadesh. It's not kesef. The proof is that it's shayach pachot mishav pruta, and the Mishnah says kesef and it doesn't say chalipin, right? That's two Deot and Tosfot, but set that aside. But there's a danger, right, that if this appears to be chalipin, right? So since isha nikneit eina nikneit b'chalipin, so that's why she's eina nikneit b'matana manat lachzir. Okay. Now, how do I explain this? Look at Tosfot. It's a short Tosfot. Tosfot says, but it's not the same as chalipin. And then he says,
Tosfot where?
on Daf, I'm sorry, it's not on what I printed. It's on Vav Amud Bet. Okay, just one line. It's Dibur Matchil Levar Meisha. Okay, he says, V'nira L'ri, Delav Chalipin Hu. That Matana Achzir is not Chalipin. So then why isn't she Mikudeshet? Umidrabanan Hu Delo Havu Kiddushin. It's only Midrabanan. Is Midoraita, goes again, Tosfot is consistent. Midoraita, there's really no difference between Kiddushay Isha of Kesef and Kinyanim of financial Kinyanim B'Kesef. Since we say in general, Matanal Manat Lachzir is Kone in Shar Kinyanim, in principle it's also Kone B'Isha, but in Isha we have this Midurabanan concern that we're going to mistake it, and we're going to say, oh, if an Isha is nicknamed Matanat Manat Lachzir, then we'll think that it's Chalipin, and then it'll come that people Mekadesh won't be Chalipin, and she really won't be Mikudeshet. Right? So it's a Gzeira Atu Chalipin. Okay? That's what Tosfot says. The Nira L'ri Delav Chalipin Hu, Midrabana Hu Delo Havu Kedushin, Lefisha Derech HaOlam Lachzir Chalipin, V'havi Ke'ein Chalipin Dami. V'ati L'meimar Isha Nikneit B'Chalifin. Okay? So she really is Mikudeshet in a Matan Amat Lachzir, but they said she's not Mikudeshet. Look what they did. They said she's not Mikudeshet because people will come to Mekadesh B'Chalipin. And then it says, Hilkach Afke'inu Rabbanim L'Kiddushim. So you're willing to use Afke'inu. Tosfot makes it up. It's very important for the sugi of Afke'inu. Tosfot is willing to apply Afke'inu in situations where the Gemara doesn't mention it. Okay? That's very important. It's not our sugya. It's not our sugya, right? But remember this. Okay? There are specific cases in the Gemara where Afke'inu is mentioned. And then in Rishonim, the whole question is, how liberal are you willing to be with throwing around your halachic weight, so to speak, to employ Afke'inu? Right? So Tosfot is reading that into the Gemara. Right? The Gemara doesn't say it's using Afke'inu. Midoraita, the Kiddushin are Kiddushin. Midrabanan, because of some sort of chashash, we're saying the Kiddushin is not Kiddushin. How do they do that? Afke'inu Rabbanan Kiddushin Mineh. Okay? But Tosfot is, yeah?
Could you just backtrack a minute? I want to make sure I understand the idea of chalipin is anything that's not liquid cash?
Chalipin is basically a form of barter.
Right.
Where you give an object, and the moment that the transfer of that object takes place, then the merchandise is transferred wherever it is. In other words, you own a penthouse in Tokyo, right? I want to do a kinyan on that penthouse in Tokyo. We're both here in Yerushalayim. I give you my Gemara.
Right.
You do Mashicha on the Gemara. And the moment you take the Gemara, that penthouse in Tokyo is mine.
But if I trade you a cow for a donkey, that's not chalipin.
Yeah, that is. That's also that.
That's all.
There are different types of chalipin. That's called chalipin shava b'shava. That's really closer to barter.
Right.
Okay, this is sort of, as I said, sort of an intellectualized barter,
Okay.
and it turns into, the bikona, the sada with the na, right, in Sefer Rut. Okay,
So that means that, like, say, exchanging like jewelry instead of cash
it's chalipin.
It's chalipin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So this Tosfot thinks that Kiddushay Kesef is direct.
Yeah. You can assume that unless somebody says it's the Rabbanan, like the Rambam, the Divrei Sofrim, or the Rabbi Tafshil Rashi, they're just assuming it's Minat Torah. And the fact is that he has to say Afke'inu. Right? So
Tzad where there's safek, he's going to use Afke'inu rather than say safek get lechuma or something like that. Even though he's putting it on the status of
there's no safek here. There's a definite gzeira. The Gemara says, B'chulu kani levar me'isha. That's the psak. That means matana manach la'achzir is definitely not mekadesh in the case of ishut. There's no safek. Amar Ravashi, ela Amar Ravashi, B'chulu kani levar me'isha. Why? Lefisha ein isha nikneit b'chalipin.
No, but I thought Tosfot equates the kinyan of objects of the kinyan.
Right. So the difference that appears in the Gemara is not on the fundamental level, but on the D'Rabbanan level. There's a Gzeir D'Rabbanan that says she's not Mekudeshet, not because there's a suffix.
On the Deoraita level, he's Mekudesh.
Yes.